let's talk, and I feel like it's like the 37th time he's the hero of Philadelphia. He got the job done. He and Jeffrey Lurie a couple of days ago got the job done. By the way, Beat the Hammer coming up in about 15 minutes. Let's welcome to the show yet again the hero of Philadelphia, Jason Kelce. Good morning, Jason.
How's it going, Joe?
I mean, a lot of smiles, man. I mean, you did it. I mean, you and Jeffrey frickin' did it, Jason. How'd you do it?
I don't know. I think, I don't know. We went in there. It was a wild experience. It was a wild experience. It really was. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I've never been in one of those meetings. I was just talking to Seltzer before we hopped on here in the whole back call thing, and like, dude, I'm in a room full of like all these owners and billionaires, and you're seeing take place the legislative process in the NFL and the game of football in a lot of ways. And it was awesome to just see how the proposals work, how guys take the floor. There's back and forth. Rogers obviously leading everything, and then there's like the committees and the Dr. Alan Sills and the health aspects of it. And I don't know, I really enjoyed the entire thing. It felt really surreal to even be in that room. Like I was in some like very inner sanctum. Like, I don't know if the Illuminati is real, but I feel like that room was probably as close as it's getting. So it was wild. It was wild.
Well, Jason, you're the only 6th-round pick from the 12 draft? 2012 or 2011?
2011, yeah.
Yeah, you're the only 6th-round pick from the 2011 draft that got in that room. So you've come a long way, my man. All right, so, Jason, there's a lot to break down. Let's just start with this. Can you just give us a sense of how impassioned was Jeffrey's speech, his remarks? How strong did he go?
He went very strong, stronger than and we talked about. The day we kind of met for breakfast and kind of had a plan of what we were going to do and an order of how we were going to say things, and he was even more impassioned in the room. And I think that you try not to take a lot of this stuff like it's an attack on you and personal and things, but I think that the reality is, a lot of this proposal was there because of the Tush push and because of the success that the Philadelphia Eagles had. And I think that, it feels a little bit like it's an attack on your organization and what you guys are doing well. And I don't think that that's necessarily the meaning behind it. You know what I mean? But certainly I think Jeffrey, voiced some opinions and was very passionate about everything. And, it was definitely, he made his point well known for sure.
What would you say, Jason, was his main argument? I know in a 1-hour speech it's probably hard to boil it down to one main thing, but what was the central theme you would say he circled back to the most as his main argument?
I think he went a lot of places, and this is one of the things, like, I didn't talk to the media after. I don't really know what, like, I went into there like, man, I don't know what to share. I didn't know media were going to be there. So I don't want to, like, go too much into what was said, but I think Jeffrey's main thing was really to kind of talk about the safety issues of the play, and one of the reasons that he thinks that's not a concern with this play in particular, and why it might be more safe than potentially other plays. And I think that was probably the main thing directly associated with the play itself. So, yeah, I would say that would probably be the main thing I'd say.
Jason, after the vote had gone down, it was reported that some suggested that the Tush push contributed to your determination to retire.
Yes,
Did that happen in the room? Did someone
yeah.
actually bring that up to you while you were in that room? Jason, you walked away because of the Tush push. Did that happen there?
It did. Well, first of all, it happened the last meeting, and that's why I was there. It felt like the Eagles felt numerous coaches and owners at the previous meeting had alluded to me stepping away from the game because the play was what it was doing to my body, and saying that, the play, I had numerous media things where I was relenting running the play. And I think that the main reason I was there was to really dispel that stuff, right? Like, I think a lot of that stuff gets said in jest, right? Like, there's a quote of me before that play that Lane Johnson said. I said, F my life, right? And we would do that sporadically, not even just around that play, but that was like a running joke. We do it in practice. If I had to, you got to block man in pass pro, that was more of like a joke, but it gets kind of taken out of context into a, like, oh, this guy really doesn't want to run this play, or it's unhealthy for him to run this play. And I think for me, that's why I was there. I was there to kind of tell them, listen, it's a grueling play. I'm not going to negate that. Like, there's a lot of energy expenditure. You have some of the biggest and best athletes in the world competing for, and sometimes less than a yard, like 6 inches. And it's so impactful, but there's no momentum build up. So it ends up just really being like energy exertion and pushing. It's not high impact. This isn't like a play that you're going to see these large injuries on, in my opinion, because it's just not what it is, right? I have a much better chance of getting hurt out in the open running full speed with a lot of momentum and pace, as opposed to being right next to somebody and just pushing as hard as I can against them.
Makes sense. No, that makes all the sense in the world, for sure. I mean, look, the biggest collision a wide receiver has is when he's in open space and guy comes flying at him. I mean, it makes sense.
Correct. I mean, and one of the things they changed they just changed the kickoff rules back because in part they brought those guys closer together, right? You when you reduce distance and you reduce the ability to build up momentum and speed, you generally are going to see less, major injuries. Now, I'm not going to say you're never going to see it. It's still a game of football, right? But I think that was important for me to dispel, was that notion. And it was funny, man. Some of the owners were a trip, and they were playing back and forth with it. Right, the moment I sat down, the first one of the we want to go again. I don't know what to share, but
sure.
It was people were definitely playing around with me being in the room and some of those comments. But at the same time, and this is one of the things that was awesome, was just how serious the whole proceeding was, how thoughtful, and not just the proposal to ban pushing or assisting the runner, but just how they go through each proposal, how things morph, how you can see that, oh man, maybe this is not happening now, maybe they're going to get back to this one's going through, and there's really an open dialogue that is fun to witness, especially with some of the characters and personalities in that room, for sure.
I mean, that makes sense, for sure. Jason, how tense would you say it was at times?
It was really tense. It was really tense after Jeffrey went because of how passionate he was, right? And I think that, I'm never in those meetings, so I don't know how typical it is that it gets that way. You know what I mean? But I think that it was tense because, Jeffrey, again, is passionate, and he made his point clear and known, and felt like the Eagles had not been really a part of the process along the way. You know what I mean? It felt like he felt like, his perspective and the Eagles' perspective had been left out. And I think that he made that known to the league, and it was a little bit tense at that moment. But it came back. I think that all these guys have been in rooms like this and have been a part of, I'm sure, some very heated discussions. But it got, I wouldn't say, trying to think on a level of 1 to 10, I'd say like a 7. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say it was like, I don't know that blows were getting ready to be thrown, but it was definitely, passionate from Jeffrey.
Jason Kelce with us here, obviously this morning on WIP as we get ready for Memorial Day weekend. Hope everyone's getting ready for a great 3-day weekend. By the way, reminder, contest line for Beat the Hammer, which will be in about 5 minutes, maybe a smidgen longer, but Beat the Hammer coming up shortly. We'll take the 5th caller in the contest line, 215-988-1258. You can compete and beat the Hammer, and I need a win after my loss last week. 215-988-1258. Beat the Hammer shortly. Jason, could you tell if you changed you and Jeffrey, if you changed some owners' opinions, and if you couldn't tell, do you guess that you did? Because one thing we've wondered is, did 32 guys walk into that room, guys or gals, walk into that room knowing for sure which way they would vote, and, like, it didn't matter what you said? Or do you think that what you said and what Jeffrey said swayed some opinions to change opinions?
I could tell one that I don't know if we swayed anybody's opinion, but I could tell just in the way the back and forth went that there were people that were still up in the air on it, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like if everybody would have been decided on it, there wouldn't have been any questions asked, right? Like, it just would have been like, all right, we already know we're voting on this. We're not listening. It felt like there was an open dialogue on the floor, which to me made it feel like there were people genuinely still trying to decide, right? And I went into it, to be honest with you, I don't know, it felt like we went into it feeling like there was some level of optimism with the votes, and I don't know how they, Ferrari and the Eagles kind of knew which people were already definitely going to be voting for it and which ones weren't, and they kind of knew there was some stuff there. But for me, I thought for sure it was going to get banned. It felt like with all the reports coming out, Dr. Alan Sills saying what he said, and the competition committee all voting to get rid of it, I did think it would probably get banned and the proposal would pass. But once I was in the room and we were talking, it felt like there was sufficient back and forth, that there were people that were still kind of willing to listen, and that usually lends itself to, the fact that, maybe they're not as hardened in their position as one would seem.
Jason, when I think of you, the first thing I think of is maybe the best pulling / downfield blocking center in the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. But you're also the guy who starts the tush push, which has become this huge talking point in the National Football League. You're tied to both, but they're very different plays. They're divergent. How much pride do you take in the tush push?
You take a tremendous amount of pride in anything you do really well, and you do a lot better than anybody else, right? I think, and especially now, teams have had opportunities to replicate this thing, and it's showing that the Eagles just happen to be really freaking good at this play. And, when you're the best in the world at something, when you line up and you know that there's nothing another team can do to stop it, when you know that other teams are trying to do the same thing you're doing and they can't do it as well, you take a tremendous amount of pride in that. I know Jeffrey alluded to it with saying he didn't, whether it gets banned or not. In some ways, once it probably does get banned, I would assume that, it was close this time, and there's going to be lobbying again next year, I would assume. To be about part of a play that, largely people have an issue with because of the competitive advantage, supposedly, but really the only team that seems to have that much of a competitive advantage is us. It feels pretty dang cool. There's how many teams have had a play taken away solely because they were that much better at it than anybody else.
It's incredible.
So,
it is.
I take a pretty sufficient amount of pride in that.
You should, Jason. You really should. All right, Jason, a couple final things, and Jason Kelce obviously with us here on WIP. So a couple final things. When you win the vote, who was the first person that you texted, or, Jeffrey? Like, you text Nick? You text Stoutland?
I'll tell you.
Who do you reach out to first?
I'll tell you exactly about this. So, first of all, I didn't find out the results of the vote because they went into another session that they're like, hey, get this Flappy out of here, and everybody else. Right? So
not in the real business.
That's right.
Correct. They went into this is the true inner sanctum moment, right? And I didn't know how it went. I was going back up to my hotel room and I got a text from a man, Jordan Malata, who found out before me because he found out from, I'm assuming, Twitter or something like that. And Jordan Malata said, "Thanks for your service. Another year of pushing Tush."
That's awesome.
So,
that is
yeah,
great.
That was the first person. That's when I text. That's when I text the other guys like, "Hey, has that really been? Are the results in?" Because it felt like they were still talking about it, but that was fun.
Makes sense. All right, Jason, how proud were you flying home?
You know, I would say I was proud, but again, like, it was weird. You know, I went not necessarily. I'm very happy that, you know, the play's remaining, and I think that I get both sides of the argument, though, if I'm being honest. And I tried to make that apparent even when I was there. Like, I think the league definitely made an effort to really attack aiding the runner downfield, which is illegal on pulling and lifting them. And the pushing aspect was the key word that they removed a few years back because it's hard to officiate. So, you know, I'm very happy that it remained just because it felt like the reasons being given just weren't that sufficient. It felt like there was a lot of, you know, let's face it, if the tush push wasn't as successful as it is, then they wouldn't be changing the rule. And and I think that's, and the reasons being given for that just didn't feel sufficient and felt like it was, you know, everybody working around it to try and push it to get banned, right? And I think that, you know, while I get all of the concerns completely, and I think that by and large, and I opened my remarks with that place, I really consider it a privilege to be there. That room, even in my 13 years in the league, all of those owners in there, Roger Goodell, the competition committee, the health and safety board, or whatever that's called with Dr. Alan Sills, they've made the game so much safer for players. And I think that a lot of these decisions that they've made have been vastly in the better, have improved the game for players. And I think it's an awesome thing that they've done there, and they've all taken seriously, and they've done an incredible job with it. And I wanted to go there and be a part of it, but also just kind of, you know, understand that all of these decisions being made are done with good intentions, either for the betterment of football, for the betterment of the NFL, or for the betterment of player safety. And I'm very proud that, you know, we get to run this play again, but I'm also, you know, was not going into it necessarily with that being the ultimate goal, even though that did occur.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, of course. No,
Yeah.
and listen, we hear your sense of, I don't know if all is the word, but your sense of appreciation for the process, and that you were invited into the process. I mean, you know,
correct.
Listen, we hear it.
And,
we hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, like, even if we would have lost, I still would have had it. I would have still had appreciation for how that occurred. You know what I mean?
I do.
Like, I completely get the sentiment that other owners are coming with, and that other people have that don't want the play to be run anymore. Other than the ugly one, like, to me, I don't think we should start banning things that are ugly in the NFL. I would have never been allowed to play football in the NFL if ugly things can't go in there. Like, I think that's just a flat out bad reason to not allow something. But I think that most of the, like, reasons that people were giving were like, let's assisting the runner. When the offensive players push on a runner, they get that yardage gain. When defensive players compile and push backwards a runner, they don't get the negative yards, right? They only get where that ball led up to. So there is, like, a level of, you know, is it, you know, what is fair? And for 60 years or whatever it is, you weren't allowed to do it. And then they changed it a few years back. So I get a lot of those concerns. I get the safety stuff because of the posturing. I get everybody's frame of reference. And, you know, definitely happy the play is going to be run again. I think that there was a sufficient amount of owners that didn't think that was enough. But at the same time, I would have understood if it was.
Sure. Jason, final thing here. I'm curious. I made this statement yesterday on the show, and I'm curious if you agree with this sentiment. Because, obviously the Eagles dodge a bullet for a year, but we don't know where it goes, 2026 and beyond. And it could circle back. I mean, it was a very close vote. Tell me if you agree with this statement. The bigger threat regarding the tush push in future years is less about if defenses can't stop the Eagles, which clearly to this point they haven't stopped. Stopping the Eagles 5% of the time isn't stopping them. To me, it's less about if defenses can't stop the Eagles. The bigger threat, in my opinion, is more about if the other 31 teams' offenses figure out how to successfully do it themselves. Do you agree with that?
I don't. No, I think that the biggest threat to the tush push is if somebody gets injured.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'll be the thing that pushes it over the hump. And listen, it's football. It's a largely safe play, and I think the numbers have shown that. We've been running it now for 3 years, and we've been running quarterback sneaks in Philly for quite a while since Jeff Stoutland's been here, even dating back to the year we won the Super Bowl. It's a largely safe play, but somebody is going to get hurt inevitably, and that's going to probably be the last thing that people are like, all right, we're probably done with this. Because I didn't get the feeling in there, and I know Jerry Jones said something differently after the fact. He kind of alluded to he doesn't know how much the competitive advantage plays into his reasoning for the vote, but I really didn't get the feeling in that room that people were voting against this solely because the Eagles were great at it. I think that there is a genuine argument from owners on just the concept of assisting the runner, but the safety thing is probably, as with a lot of the rules that have changed, the number one thing that'll change it if that happens.
Jason, let me thank you, my man. I mean, big time for carving out some time for us today, but also as an Eagles fan, as you know I am and we are, for your dedication to the Eagles. Needless to say, it has gone into the retirement phase where you've got another win for the Eagles. And I think it could create, literally additional wins for the Eagles. So great job, man. And again, thanks for being a huge part of the show. And have a great Memorial Day weekend, man. I mean, get yourself a brew this weekend and toast your accomplishment. You got another win. Just get some garage beer this weekend.
Oh yeah, we're actually we're going to be doing something with garage beer down in Florida. It'll be a lot of fun. So
good.
All right, I appreciate you guys having me on, and
Jason, final thing: who you rooting for,
Birds.
the Hammer or the contestant who's about to lose and beat the Hammer?
I always root for the contestant.
That's
always.
my guy.
Man.
Right. Thank you,
This is the
Jason.
part where I hang up on you.
Perfect answer.
Say goodbye. All right. Hey, Jason, good stuff, man. Thanks so much, and really, congrats. It was well done.
All right, thanks, Joe.